Good morning. I was going to say they're going to lower the lights, so get your seats, because then I won't be able to see you. So, good morning. Yeah, that's right. I want to know that you're out there because I can't see you. Good morning again. This has been a fabulous summit. I hope you're enjoying it as much as I am. The attendance yesterday, and I suspect like today, half the audience is out there talking to each other. And that's the kind of interaction we want, but we hope you come in and encourage everyone to come in because the programming is going to continue to be fabulous all day today. So thank you for joining us for day 2 of our Safe and Just Community Summit. And we are so grateful for our partnership with the National Urban League, and you will hear from President Mark Morial shortly. So this is day 2 of our summit, talking about the characteristics of safe communities, which are resourced, just, healthy, and restored. And this morning's plenary session is going to be focused on the role of government leaders in safe and just communities and how these leaders can partner with communities to produce public safety. First, we will have an opportunity to speak with the United States Associate Attorney General Vinita Gupta about the federal government's efforts to support public safety. And then I'm excited to welcome an impressive group of mayors to the stage, all of whom are working hard to ensure that their communities are resourced, just, healthy, and restored. And it's a very diverse group of mayors from across the country that President Mark Morial will introduce that panel. This work is not easy, and they face many challenges. But what I told them downstairs is this audience, all of us working on this, support the work that they're doing, and we really need to listen to their challenges and think about how we can support their success, because their success is our success. And so we want to demonstrate how partnering and investing in the communities can create trust, heal divisions, and build safety. But as we heard yesterday, there's some challenges at the state level in many of these cities that are trying to strip them of their powers to do this fabulous work. So let's, again, think about how we can support their work. And then at the end, after the mayor's panel, I am very pleased that our own mayor of New York City, Eric Adams, who also happens to be a John Jay alum, will close out the plenary session. So now to the first plenary session. And I hope the folks outside are coming in because you're going to miss something wonderful. I'm delighted to extend a warm welcome to Vinita Gupta, the United States Associate Attorney General and the 3rd ranking official at the Department of Justice. She doesn't like long introductions, but she's got a long bona fides that need to be heard. Associate Attorney General Gupta supervises multiple litigating divisions within the Department of Justice, including the Civil Division, the Civil Rights Division, Antitrust Division, the Tax Division, Environmental and Natural Resources Division. And you may think that, what does that have to do with justice? As you'll learn, all of these issues are intertwined, and she has that umbrella focus over all of these things with a justice focus. She also oversees the grant-making components of the department, including the Office of Justice Programs, and we heard from Amy Solomon yesterday, and the Office on Violence Against Women. B. Hansen, who used to run that office, will be moderating a panel this afternoon, and the Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services. But she also oversees the Community Relations Services and the Office for Access to Justice. Associate Attorney General, I gave you a promotion. Associate Attorney General Gupta previously served as the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. That's the nation's oldest and largest coalition of nonpartisan civil rights organizations in the United States. Before serving in that capacity, from October 2014 to January 2017, we all know what happened on January 20th, 2017. She was the Associate Attorney General in charge of the Civil Rights Division, Assistant Attorney General in charge of the Civil Rights Division, and she was the Chief Prosecutor on Civil Rights issues for the Barack Obama administration. Prior to her tenure leading the Civil Rights Division, Associate Attorney General Gupta served as the Deputy Legal Director and Director of the Center for Justice at the ACLU. I could go on and on because she's done a lot. She's not old. She's done a lot in that short time period. but always focused on justice issues and civil rights issues. So we are going to begin a conversation. So thank you for joining us, and I'm going to ask her the first question as I go get seated. So the first question is, let's start with public safety in particular. We know that violence, and particularly gun violence, continues to be a significant problem across the country. Let's talk about what the federal government is doing to address the scourge of gun violence.
Well, good morning, everyone. Carol, thank you so much for inviting me and moderating this conversation. I had the unique pleasure of working and collaborating with Carol when she was head of the Office of Justice Programs in the Obama administration, and we were able to get a lot done. It's never felt like enough, but to push for racial equity and justice reform while supporting system stakeholders, and I'm really excited to be here today. I'm also excited because this is one of my favorite conferences, and I know it's been a few years since you've been able to have it, and so I was really eager to come back. And I'm honored to be here among all of you. I know many of you, and you have been working on these issues for a long time. So we are talking about gun violence after a horrific weekend, yet another weekend, and yet I woke up again to more news of gun violence in another community this morning, and there's a degree to which we can become numb to these problems and even to mass shootings, and yet they are profoundly unacceptable. And one of the things that I think is really important that we should remember as we fight to tackle gun violence and fight to keep communities safe are a few things. One is that there is nothing inevitable about gun violence. Gun violence is preventable. And when we understand that and we take as a premise this fact that there is nobody disposable or that we should be writing off when it comes to gun violence. And so when in about May of 2021, when we were beginning to see kind of a surge in gun violence and violent crime, the Justice Department issued a kind of comprehensive strategy around fighting violent crime and advancing public safety. And I just want to talk briefly, if that's okay, about this and then focus in on a couple of key areas of our work. There are 4 pillars that we kind of articulated at that time. One is that you cannot fight violent crime and have public safety without building police community trust. And that is core, that the legitimacy and fighting for fair policing and constitutional policing has to be a core part of any public safety strategy. The second was that law enforcement alone is not going to solve the problem of violent crime. And this sounds obvious to those of us in this room, and many of you have been toiling away for years advancing community violence intervention and prevention programs. But we decided at the federal government level that it was time for the federal government to very seriously and much more systematically invest in community-based programs, in local leadership, in local organizations, sometimes hyper-local organizations that never before had access to Justice Department funding, where we could help support the work that was happening by local leaders who know their community best, who are often the most credible messengers, some of whom have actually had very direct engagement and involvement in the criminal justice system to basically help fight gun violence and help save people's lives and keep healthy and safe communities. The third prong was that with limited resources for law enforcement, that law enforcement needed to really go to where investigating and prosecuting the root causes of violent crime was going to have an impact. And I look at the strategy on fentanyl and fentanyl poisoning right now, where the DA is focused on going after the cartels themselves, but going to the root causes and drivers of violent crime. And then the fourth was really important, and this is partly driven from lessons learned in the 90s that all of us are all too well familiar with, but that the metrics of success for the department would not be arrests and prosecutions, but would be the actual reduction of violent crime in neighborhoods and communities, and that we had to keep our eye focused on that prize and not get lost in this notion that arrest and prosecution numbers would be the metric for success. I want to hone in, though, on the community violence intervention effort, because it really is a massive effort that is building off of the work that many of you in this room have pioneered for years. This is an effort that, that you know, and I want to give credit to the Office of Justice Programs leadership in this room today, because they are really hard at work partnering with all of you to lift this effort up. But it centers the very communities that are most at risk of gun violence and are experiencing violent crime. And it means investing, as I said, in these hyper-local efforts and building capacity for research and evaluation. We want to build capacity for community-based organizations that we're now funding intermediaries to help support, because sometimes federal applications, as you know, Carol, can be incredibly arduous and out of reach for a lot of local organizations. So helping to build their capacity to do this work. I was out in St. Louis with Amy Solomon and several members of her team at OJP. It was honestly one of the most inspiring meetings, just being in a room of hundreds of community leaders that are doing this work and doing it. It's everything from peacemakers in Los Angeles to mental health and peer specialists in Baltimore to a range of programs all over the country that are really hard at work. There's no one size fits all. We don't have a silver bullet or formula. If we did, we would know exactly how to crack this problem. And so this is really grown out of an understanding too that the problem of gun violence aren't, we wake up to these news stories and they're in our news feed for a couple of days, maybe a week at most, and then we move on to the next one. And there's a way that you can look at these problems as kind of isolated events without understanding that a lot of what we are seeing are really the product of massive inequities in our communities, a lack of funding for mental health, a growing increase in the problem of hate and hate violence in our communities, and that the lack of substance use treatment, et cetera. And so the notion now, and it's one that I think many of us have been living with, but how can the federal government actually practice what we preach in supporting investments on healthcare and education and recognizing labor and jobs, the kind of myriad roles of other agencies and other partners, that the responsibility lies no longer just in this kind of law enforcement response, but actually with all of these system players that need to be at the table to support healthy communities. And fundamentally, we need to be driven by the very people who are most at risk of violence and who can teach us about what works and make sure that federal policy can support local efforts in a smart way.
So thank you for that. You anticipated some of my questions, so we're going to go a little deeper on some of those. So thank you for that. So one of the things that we learned after January 20, 2017 is we used to say that there's a limit to what the federal government can do, but that means we empowered state and local governments. But when we have a federal government that supports these issues, thank you very much, and we're happy to have you all back in place leading on these issues, there's an opportunity again to use the federal platform, bully pulpit, to really address some of the issues that still wind up being local focused. So you talked about your fourth pillar about changing how we measure success in looking at crime reduction versus arrest. How can the federal government use your voice to help permeate that on the state and local level? Because most arrests take place at the state and local level.
Yeah, we have 94 U.S. attorneys' offices around the country that really take the lead because, as you said, crime is often local in its depiction, and the partnerships that we have at the local level are what are leading the way, whether it's community partnerships and CVI to the law enforcement partnerships. And I think it is important that we have a federal government that is supporting these efforts, but we have programs, some of which were started by the person to my right, on Project Safe Neighborhoods and PSP, that are both national, but rooted in each of the U.S. attorney's offices, or targeted strategies that provide training and technical assistance at the local level that really bring to the table community leaders, law enforcement leaders, the local, state, and federal law enforcement, the mental health specialists, taking a kind of more holistic approach at comprehensive crime prevention and public safety. And having that type of table in every jurisdiction in the country, kind of in recognition that demographics in communities are different, that the needs of communities are different, is something that I think really is the way that we work at the local level. We can't to win these problems from Washington, D.C. We've got to also pilot and test and sometimes fail in the strategies that we use to support local leaders. I think one of the things that is really important is when the federal government has dollars, we can't just fund the stuff that we know. We're studying all the time, and we need to study and be evidence informed about what we're funding, but we also need to be willing to take some risks and go where there may be piloted initiatives from local leaders that seem good. They may not be tested yet, but we want to support so that we can say, hey, does this work? Did this work? What did we learn from it? And so that's how we really try to operationalize this at the local level. Fundamentally, all of this plays out locally. Whether it's about what fair policing actually looks like, that's a local question. Yes, we have the U.S. Constitution, but what that means is what it means for people on the ground in communities. What does equal justice look like and racial justice look like? That's going to be defined at the local level. So this is how we do that work from the federal government. And I think it requires a certain amount of humility and understanding that there's a role for the federal government, but ultimately the partnerships we have at the local and state level are pretty much everything.
So one space where the federal government does have an outside voice is in shaping criminal justice reform. And so what are the department's priorities in shaping criminal justice reform with the backdrop of these investments you're talking about that need to happen at the state and local level?
Yeah, there's a lot of levers that we have at the Justice Department. We have the enforcement lever. So at the Civil Rights Division, we've got an ability to go into prisons and jails that have unconstitutional conditions and to force remedies through consent decrees or hopefully work through them collaboratively. We do that with police departments, and the most recent announcement we made was in the Louisville Police Department, where we made some pretty searing findings, and we're now negotiating a consent decree with the Louisville Police Department. We've got dozens around the country. But enforcement is only one way to kind of address these problems. And in a nation of close to 18,000 police departments, in order to really affect the culture of policing, that's where the grant-making components come in. And it is something that, sometimes gets a lot less focused than the work of the Civil Rights Division. But actually, the grant-making components really do have the power to do the culture change work. I know Carol's loving me saying this because
we're smiling because when we were colleagues, we had some fierce conversations around these issues.
And there's no question that we are distributing close to $5 billion in funding, and it covers research and technical assistance and the like. But so I'm going to throw out some examples. We're funding de-escalation and crisis intervention training. We're funding co-responder models and mental health response models to basically change the paradigm of how we're dealing with behavioral health issues around the country. When Tyree Nichols was beaten to death in Memphis, it was the COPS office and the Office of Justice Programs that thought about what are the programs that we have in place, and we announced through the COPS office that we're doing a review on specialized units to look at why and how police departments make decisions to have specialized units, and that if they're going to have a specialized unit, that there needs to be a whole bunch of accountability and supervision and oversight guardrails in place. And looking at that, as they say, you could do an investigation into one police department, but the ability to basically put guidance out there. After Tyree Nichols' death, I firmly, and I talked to police chiefs all over the country, that was a moment that every police chief in America should be looking at their specialized units, at their police department, and saying, could this happen on my watch? And so we're doing that type of work. I just came back from Uvalde, and a few weeks ago, it was one of the most intense and kind of moving trips that I had made. I wanted to go down the COPS office. We relaunched collaborative reform. This was a program that was rendered, it was decimated. It was no longer in the prior administration, and it's an important program to basically go and work with police departments where the chief and the mayor want this assistance of the Justice Department. And we relaunched not only kind of the way we do police department organizational assessments, but also our after-action reports. And Carol, you'll remember that after San Bernardino and the Pulse nightclub shootings, we went in to understand what happened, what was the law enforcement response, and what can we learn. So after the absolutely horrific events in Uvalde last May 24th, the mayor in Uvalde reached out and said, obviously, I don't know what the answers are and what happened in the 77 minutes it took before the shooter was killed in the classrooms, and I need an after action. And so we have been conducting this after action. And I want to mention this particular example because people sometimes think we only go in when there's been a particular kind of way that police misconduct looks, but this was a national kind of focus on police inaction in this school. And we've been using our programs to look at, and we're doing a whole forensics on what happened in that 77 minutes, but more importantly, what can we learn about how you do school safety? What are the lessons for the field about this type of event so that we can engage in reform that has a much broader impact than just on this one incident and across police departments around the country.
So I'm glad you used that example because policing's under a lot of pressure now because of what happened with Tyree Nichols and other situations, what happened in Uvalde, and they're being asked to really examine themselves, but at a time when so many are retiring and they're having issues recruiting. Though I will say any police department having trouble recruiting, come to John Jay. We produce wonderful, talented future law enforcement leaders. But what can the federal government do, and what are you doing? I know that you oversee the COPS office and the Bureau of Justice Assistance indirectly through Amy. What are your tools to help with the police departments thinking about how do they attract the right people into policing?
Yeah, we currently have a recruitment and retention crisis in law enforcement, and it's probably the #1 issue I hear about in every jurisdiction I go to, and in terms of on the policing front. And it is there's, as I said, limited levers for the federal government. The COPS office has a grant on police officer hiring, and probably every year we're close to 1,000 officers that we support and fund. But the recruitment and retention crisis is not just going to be solved by kind of dollars for hiring. When you have a legitimacy and trust problem, people who could see themselves as part of a police department or part of a public safety infrastructure, they need to believe that system works for their community. And so I think it is balled up in trust issues and legitimacy issues. It's also balled up in morale issues for officers. Look, I think we all can agree that we have for so long, for decades really, placed so many social problems at the feet of police and expected with blunt instruments of arrest and incarceration to be able to address these issues when other social systems were basically getting disinvested from and receding from playing an active role in public safety. And we now, I think, really do have a greater understanding of what needs to be a shared responsibility. And so we've got to deal with these morale issues. We have to deal with the trust and legitimacy issues. The federal government, outside of having the funding pool, we've also launched a campaign that was built by Maureen McGuff, who credit where credit due, and we're really glad that she's joined us at DOJ from the policing project. She started a campaign called 30 by 30, and it's a goal to have 30% of police agencies that take this pledge be 30% female. You would be shocked. I think I'm going to get the statistics hopefully not too wrong, but around 2% of law enforcement executives in this country are women. And 12% of police agencies are female. And I think about kind of some of the culture change that can happen from female leadership and having more women in the ranks. That's just one strategy. Why are we leaving, when women are more than 50% of the population, leaving them out as a recruitment and retention strategy? But also, what is it going to take to attract more women, more people of color? We've got scholarship programs with HBCUs. I know a lot of law enforcement agencies now are partnering with HBCUs to try to build that pipeline. So this is a complicated issue. We just had a convening on this topic a couple of weeks ago, and we're putting out a report soon about the role specifically of the federal government to support this. But I think you can't address this crisis without looking at all of the other issues that we're working on in policing itself.
This is great, and I also encourage you to look at Hispanic serving institutions as
Yep,
well, which
yep.
we are proudly one. So I'm going to switch gears to a topic that you and Lisa Foster and I used to talk about quite a bit, so I think you'll know where this question is coming from. It's about fees and fines, and I know that that the three of us issued a letter on fees and fines back in the 2016. That issue is front and center again for you today. Tell the audience what you're doing in that area.
So just a couple of weeks ago, we updated this letter. It unfortunately was rescinded in 2017. This was a really collaborative effort between the Office of Justice Programs, the Access to Justice Initiative, which we also relaunched. Attorney General Garland relaunched this early on in his tenure at the department, and the Civil Rights Division. This guidance was something that, as Carol well knows, emerged out of our work doing the investigation into the Ferguson Police Department back in 2014. And some of you may remember that when that investigation took place, what it really revealed was a much bigger systemic problem happening in Ferguson and the St. Louis area, but one that we uncovered was actually a nationwide problem. This is where in 2014 in Ferguson, there were 21,000 residents, but 90,000 citations in 1 year. And that the Ferguson Municipal Court was basically issuing thousands of arrest warrants for failure to appear in court. And in 2013 issued 9,000 arrest warrants in this town of 21,000 people. And so when
Most of those people were black and brown.
Let me just say, almost all of those people were black. They were using these low-level kind of fines and fees to basically entrap black residents in Ferguson in unending cycles of debt. The municipal court was often open a day and a half a month, and the date kept changing, so people literally did not know when they could actually pay their fines and fees in court. And in 2016, when we negotiated the consent decree, we negotiated a whole new way of looking at fines and fees, and to this day, about 50,000 of these have been forgiven as part of a massive kind of amnesty program around these fines and fees and reforms to the court. So fast forward, we issued this guidance, and I think it was one of our great successes that it triggered this big conversation building off of work that community advocates had been doing around the country. We met with state court judges, you'll remember. We met with chief justices that came to the table to talk about this. And then in 2017, and we had some funding streams that we were using to support. So when we realized there were stories just in the past year, and some of you may have read stories about Brookside, Alabama, or you're seeing fines and fees in New York, which has got its own share of this problem, and fines and fees around the country, really local government systems using this fines and fees, basically funding their functions off of the backs of low-income people and black and brown residents around the country. And we realize that this is a very alive problem. We've made a lot of progress, actually, since 2016 around the country. I think there's something like 24 states have ended driver's license suspensions for failure to pay. These are bipartisan states. Mississippi and California started it. And there's much more work to do. There's about 16 states that have ended or eliminated or reduced fines and fees in the juvenile justice system. And you can imagine for young people to be saddled with debt and have their parents have to then be saddled with that debt, the kind of particularly pernicious impact on low-income families and black and brown families that has. And so we realized that we needed to reassert ourselves as the federal government to support efforts at the local level to eliminate unconstitutional fines and fees.
And let me just phrase it a different way. Basically, what they're doing is criminalizing poverty.
It is absolutely criminalizing poverty, and we're seeing it not just in fines and fees, but across a range. And this is a major focus for us, and we have a lot of work to do.
And part of it is raising awareness because, you know, the local governments are constrained, as the mayors will tell us, about finding the resources to fund the things they want to fund. And there was a period of time when people thought, this is the panacea. will have fines and fees to support local government, but we see the impact of that. So thank you for your leadership in raising that profile again. So this is the 60th anniversary year of Gideon versus Wainwright. And for those of you who don't know, that's the right to counsel for anyone in a criminal proceeding. But we know that, I see some public defender supporters over there. But what we're seeing, though, is they continue to be under-resourced. I'm smiling because you know that I was under great pressure when I was handing out the money to figure out how I was going to equalize that funding for public defenders as well. This is an unfair question, I realize, but I've been asked to ask it. What is your perspective about how do we resource, how does the federal government support better resourcing public defenders?
Well, to the public defenders out there, let me just say thank you for your work. I think we should all give a round of applause to public defenders. I truly believe public defenders are too often unsung heroes in our system. There is no legal system that can truly be legitimate without adequate defense and adequate defenders. And they have been historically under-resourced, underappreciated. The same kind of policing, retention, and recruitment crisis we're seeing is applicable to public defenders, as I understand it too, all over the country. And we need to do more to celebrate what they do and to bring more people into the profession. I'm sure there's lots of good John Jay students too going into this, I hope.
CUNY Law School is a big provider of public defenders.
So we wanted to make sure that we could do our little part here at the Justice Department to lift up the role of public defenders. And so Rachel Rossi, who is the head director of our Access to Justice program, and now it's got a staff of 32 people. This is a different level.
God, 32 people in Access to Justice?
Yes.
Did you give them a funding stream too?
Congress appropriated a funding stream. We make progress, like, as we go, as sometimes we take 2 steps back and sometimes we take 2 steps forward. But, and so Rachel and her team organized a Gideon tour around the country. And part of it was just to be able to lift up this issue because we don't talk about it enough. And we went to different cities around the country. I went to Iowa. I was focused specifically on rural legal aid and rural defense. But there were trips all over. And the department made clear, as part of every kind of place we went, we had a deliverable. And one of the deliverables was a joint letter from Amy Solomon and Rachel Rossi making clear that our Burn JAG funding can be used to support public defense. And that we invite more applications from state administering agencies and from state and local agencies to help support public defense this way. When we came in COVID, we were anticipating a major evictions crisis and concerned about if you take people out of their homes, what the impact will be on housing and public safety and health and well-being. And so we had done this big campaign to help make sure that there were enough lawyers to support people in housing court and to prevent unlawful evictions. And the Gideon Tour was another effort of that kind, to call to action, to lift up public defenders. The Attorney General gave a very eloquent speech about the defense function and public defenders, and we did announce that we need to see more Burn JAG dollars go to public defense, but we have a dedicated person now at the Access to Justice program that is working only on increasing support for public defenders and thinking through other possible funding streams and the like. So there's a lot of work happening in this space. There needs to be more. We know that the burden is high, the resources are low, morale is also low, and so we've got to be kind of all of us involved in the effort to ensure that we've got that people really understand the importance of the public defense function in protecting people's constitutional rights and people's liberty and lives.
I love that you all are going out in the communities and hearing from them, so thank you for expanding on all of this work. You've mentioned that you are working closely with people in the communities to address violence issues. Where else are you working closely to hear the voices of those who are impacted by our criminal justice system?
Everywhere I go, and everywhere I think the senior leadership of the department goes, we cannot formulate policy or think of programs without engaging the communities that are directly impacted by crime, by unjust policing, by mental health crisis and the like. And so we spend a lot of time doing listening sessions, going into communities, looking at programs, visiting grantees. We have the Community Relations Service that you mentioned that exists really as America's peacemakers, founded in the 60s, and helps to mediate tensions in communities, whether around hate or police violence or the like. But we also are, we just a year ago, we're coming on a year, President Biden signed an executive order on policing and criminal justice reform. This is an executive order that came about when the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act negotiations failed in Congress. And it is actually a very comprehensive and very heavy lift for the Justice Department. It's 90 deliverables on everything from we are creating the first nationwide accreditation system for law enforcement agencies, and it has involved a lot of stakeholder engagement with law enforcement, with civil rights groups, with community leaders, grant making, trying to incentivize best practices. They're in the EO, the Justice Department actually, before the EO was signed, updated our use of force policy to include the duty to intervene, the duty to render medical aid, the duty to de-escalate, things that we had been training on but hadn't been in writing, and made that federal government wide for all of the federal government law enforcement agencies. We are building and about to operationalize a national law enforcement accountability database so that chiefs that are hiring officers can see their disciplinary background, see whether they have sustained violations, and to be able to make smart hiring decisions accordingly, something again supported by law enforcement and community leaders. And every step of this, Carol, has involved a lot of input from people in law enforcement and civil rights and community leaders. It's been very painstaking. But we also did things like in our reentry work, and I know you've been a pioneer in this, and I don't want to miss out on this.
That's really Amy's who's out there.
It's both of yours, but this reentry work has been really important. We've been speaking to people. We did a survey out in the people that are in BOP custody to understand what their civil legal needs are, and 50,000 men and women responded to this survey and told us what their civil legal needs are. And we just announced a pilot program to provide civil legal aid in BOP facilities to help people address their civil legal needs there. This is a population that largely they were losing parental rights, they were losing access to housing and employment simply because they did not have access to lawyers. That's one thing. We are now also, when people are coming out of prison, we are giving people IDs, because you and I both know you can't get a job, you can't get a driver's license, you can't get housing without IDs. So facilitating a process for people leaving prisons to be able to get state IDs, and doing the same with Real ID and working in partnership with DHS. We now have, we are on the cusp of being able to institute Pell Grants. This was through a law that was enacted in 2020 that removed that prohibition. There's going to be something like 460,000 people who are currently incarcerated that will have access to grants for post-secondary education, and we're working really hard with the Department of Education to get that done. So I'm giving you a flavor. All of this has involved intense listening to people in the criminal justice system who are coming into contact with it, people who work in the criminal justice system, whether they are judges or police officers, whether they are probation officers, whether they are CVI advocates and activists. And so listening and really understanding what is it, how can we bring our levers to bear? I'm only going to be in this job for a limited amount of time. Amy is too, in our teams. And we want to be able to lift the amazing ideas of the career men and women who are there working on these issues, and to advance and not waste a moment to actually do some of this work that we know has worked around the country, frankly, pioneered at the state and local level, and to have the federal government finally come in to say, we're going to support it, we're going to scale it up, we're going to study it, and we're going to try to make affect nationwide policy and culture change this way. So these are some of the ways in which we're doing this work.
So she just said a lot in a few minutes that I don't, I want to make sure that you hear and unpack a little bit. This is phenomenal. And what you're, I don't know that everyone in the audience has a full appreciation for is the reason why it's important that the people in the Justice Department and leadership now have the experience and know what was seeded back during the Obama years when they were in office. And to see what you've accomplished now is absolutely amazing. The ability to be able to bring services to people in BOP, the Federal Bureau of Prisons, because the OJP money cannot be used for that. So the fact that you all have figured out a lot of these issues is superb. What I worry about is that people don't know this is happening. And so thank you all for the audience for being here. And so now your job is to make sure you spread the word. This administration is not getting enough credit for what it has done. So thank you. Thank you for your leadership on these very tough issues and making sure these changes happen. Can you give a round of applause? Thank you. So I was going to try to get us back on schedule, but they're giving me a little bit more time. What haven't I asked you? Because there are a lot of things that are happening that because I'm on the outside, I don't see. What else is happening that this audience should know about so that they can, number one, celebrate and share, but also learn from and take back to their communities again? Because one of the beauties of having federal leadership is that you can, begin to seed things and start things that we hope trickle to the state and local level. We also know from our years of our earlier Smart on Crime convenings that the great things happen at the state and local level that influence the federal government. So tell us about anything that's happening that we don't know about yet.
Well, first, thank you. I hope that you all will be able to help be messengers for getting out the word. And, when I'm talking about CVI funding, this is out on the street now. So apply, get the word out. We've got funding streams out there to help support the good work happening around the country. And, it's an interesting time to be back at the Justice Department because obviously it's a different time than when you and I were both there. And often the public and the media is focused on a couple of key things that are happening at the Justice Department and forgetting all of the other work that we do to support communities every day around the country. And so I do think there's been less attention and focus, but not just to the Justice Department's work in this space, but really to all of the issues that you were talking about at this conference. Because there's so much going on, there's so much polarization, there's so much focus on some key other issues. And so my hope is that we've put a lot out recently, and some of these things that I was telling you about with the Pell Grants and the BOP, and there is some of it was really emanated out of thinking that we did around the executive order. I hope that you all will take a minute to look at it. And to understand the breadth. We just put out a big strategic plan on alternatives to incarceration and reentry that lists many of these things. I will just say there's a lot of work happening in policing at the Justice Department. I wanted to name one more, which is that about a year ago as well with the Office of Justice Programs, we launched a knowledge lab, the Policing Knowledge Lab, which really is modeled after the UK College of Policing. It's the surprising thing that the Justice Department has done so much work and does so much work in policing through funding, through enforcement, through technical assistance, but we've never had one place where everyone can go. You can go, I can go, police chiefs can go, community activists can go to understand what are some of the best practices that departments have put into place or consent decrees have put into place around the country around use of force, de-escalation, around stop searches and arrests, et cetera. And it's a one-stop shop to aggregate all of that so that everyone can be armed with the knowledge that we need to make fair policing a reality. So that's just one example of some of the innovation, but it's, as you said, building off of what we know have been gaps in the work that we do, and really it came because people asked us to build up.
And the fact that you're getting this done at scale, I mean, Lori Robinson tried to create this at OJP years ago, And it's nice to see that it's being leveraged and really going to be this powerful database. You mentioned something else earlier that Barry Scheck from the Innocence Project has also always wanted, which is a database of police discipline so that people can use that. Tell us a little bit more about that and where you think that might be housed.
Yeah, that really came as one of the demands nationwide after George Floyd's murder and a series of high-profile deaths and killings. And we did this because it was really important that and I will say, I heard this from police chiefs, I heard it from community activists, why do we continue to have a problem where a police officer who has a long history of sustained disciplinary complaints is able to travel jurisdiction to jurisdiction to get jobs simply because the hiring executive can't see or access that record. It's not good for the police department that's hiring. It's not good for the chief. It's not good for other officers.
And to put this in context, because people don't often understand that we don't have a universal police force in the United States. We've got 18,000 different police agencies. So being able to pull this together is a mammoth undertaking.
It is a mammoth undertaking, and there already is a database that exists that was started by this group IATLS that has a national decertification index. But what the executive order has asked us to do is make it mandatory for federal law enforcement, but also to expand the kind of number of categories of what data we're collecting so that we can have better informed hiring around for law enforcement executives, and to make sure that officers who probably should not be in the business of law enforcement can no longer get jobs by moving around from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And so this is one of the things that we're building right now, and it's a really important kind of contribution. I want to also, another thing that I want to put a fine point on from this executive order is the focus on mental health. We know that our young people are suffering a lot from a variety of mental health stresses and behavioral disorders as a result of many things. Nobody knows the exact reason, but also that we don't have the infrastructure we need in place in this country to really seriously take this issue on. When I was in Uvalde, it's a town and a city that was going to have lifelong trauma because of what happened. And the trauma is not just experienced by the families who lost their young children to this gun violence. It's the teachers, it's the first responders, and really it's the whole town. And I was really, saddened to learn that the closest mental health treatment facility was in San Antonio, 90 minutes away. And you and I, we have jobs. I have kids. I don't have 90 minutes in a day, let alone times 2 to go and come back. So they set up this makeshift tent, a trauma center, where it's like these pods that have been dropped in, funded by foundations, crowdsourced, because there hasn't been support for this type of thing. Now the state they're building a treatment center now, but that's the kind of this type of crisis happens, and these crises are happening all over the country. We do not have the type of infrastructure that we need to seriously contend with some of the great mental health challenges that we're seeing in our communities today. And this is work that we all need to collectively take on. You're going to have a panel of mayors, and I know this is a major issue that mayors are contending with. And so we've got to do better, and I want ideas. Amy wants ideas. We all need ideas for what our community is doing to fix this and to make it better. But this is going to be a long-standing problem for our communities, and there will be public safety ramifications long downstream, let alone all of the other ramifications that we're dealing with. And we're seeing this issue in the news because of particular incidents, but we need kind of structural and systemic solutions for it.
And that is a wonderful segue to our next panel. But what I hope you're hearing from Vanita is a commitment to partner with all of you all from the department on all of these issues. And I hope you're also hearing that none of these issues can be addressed without close partnership between the federal government and the local government. And so I am going to turn the mic over to President Morial to introduce the mayor's panel so that we can see another aspect of government partnership in this work. But please join me in giving not just a round of applause, but a round of thanks to Vanita for her leadership and what's happening at the department.
Public safety, it begins as public health. We think that crime and violence is a public health issue. This is really about focusing on people. You make the folks in the community understand their agency and take responsibility for it and lift it up to a point where they're doing it in a way where they want to get training, they want to get classes, they want to further it and advance it. So it's one thing to be able to solve violence in your neighborhood, but to be able to do it in 2 or 3 different neighborhoods at the same time.
It's youth programs, it's workforce development programs, it's mental health services.
There really is a role for the rest of the community to play as we think about making our communities safer.
Being really intentional about how you are co-creating solutions to address those social, economic, and environmental conditions with community really is a different way of approaching things.
Getting the youth to really be able to feel heard and seen. Having engagement like that, and that's just an example of how we do it in St. Louis.
It has to be an integrative approach to addressing public safety in our community. And we have found, based on the data, that our trajectory is one that is leading us in the right direction.
Now you get a cop and a social worker. Now you get a cop, a social worker, and an outreach worker. Now you get a cop, a social worker, an outreach worker, and a job developer.
Meet people where they are and deploy the right resource to their needs.
It is a whole community undertaking. The mayor or whoever's running the city, you've got to have your stakeholders from the community 100% bought in.
We have to put the public back in public safety.
The only way you really build trust with anybody is really building something together.
Let's give Vanita Gupta and Carol Mason another big round of applause for continuing the conversation about safety and justice. So I'm so pleased, and once again want to thank the team here at John Jay, the Vera Institute, the National Urban League's Equitable Justice team led by Jerica Richardson for all of their work, and all of you for being a part of this very, very important discussion, and another round of applause for all of the aforementioned. Just 2 quick things. At the National Urban League, we work on the intersection of thought, leadership, and action. And part of what we do is to take thoughts, build them into policy recommendations, and then work to implement them. I'm proud this morning that we, as a part of this summit, are releasing a new report, this report, Towards a New Age for Community Safety. And what it is a compilation by region of initiatives being undertaken by cities and states and counties across the nation towards a new framework for public safety. I want to strongly recommend this report to each and every one of you. And a card like this has or will be distributed. So by simply going to that or that, you can download this report and take a look at it. I just had a chance to take a look at it, and it's just full of great information about the work that's being done all across the nation. And that is why this morning we have invited mayors of major American cities to be with us today. They are on the front line. They are at the intersection of safety and justice. They are where the rubber meets the road. They are the ones that have to implement policy. They are the ones that are fiercely in the hot kitchen, on the ground, doing very hard work, working with activists and others, legislators and city council members, law enforcement and people in housing communities, working hard to bring about meaningful change. So we're going to hear from them this morning, but to moderate and lead the discussion, I am so happy that we have Lindsay Davis with us. She is indeed a superstar in the field of broadcast journalism. She's the anchor for ABC News Live Prime, ABC News Live first ever streaming evening newscasts, and Weekend World News Tonight on Sundays. She's also a correspondent filing reports for World News Tonight, Good Morning America, 2020, and Nightline. When does she get a rest? Ladies and gentlemen, please greet Lindsay Davis.
Good morning, good morning. Are you all ready to have a lively discussion here, an academic debate, if you will, with regard to what it takes to keep our communities safer? We just heard from Mark talking about how we have these mayors here who are on the front line. So I'm going to introduce you to these warriors in the hopes of having this discussion about how we can help our local, state, and federal governments work more smoothly, more effectively on our behalf. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Mayor Tashara Jones from the city of St. Louis, Missouri. Mayor Sharon Weston Broome from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Mayor Chokwe Lumumba from Jackson, Mississippi. And Mayor Ross Baraka from Newark, New Jersey. Thank you so much, Mayor. Okay, here we go. Yeah, let's all have a seat here. All right, so I recently had the opportunity to speak with the current president of the Council of Foreign Affairs, Dr. Richard Hass, and he said that if you're not afraid, you're not paying attention. And so I'd just like to go around, we'll start with you. What keeps you up at night when it comes to your communities and making sure everyone is safe? Is there one particular aspect that you think this is really disconcerting?
Well, I just think most of the things that we deal with in our cities, oftentimes the problems are so huge and heavy and pretty intractable. The amount of resources and effort that it takes to move this is incredible. So you need as much support as you can. And then, so most of the time you stay up thinking about, are you going to get these resources? Are you going to have the kind of support that you need going forward? Not just from external forces, but from internal forces as well. Who's going to help you carry this down this road? And, so that keeps you up trying to figure out how to put it all together to make sure that this thing works.
Mayor Lumumba, how about you?
Well, first, I haven't slept in 6 years. Just to build off of what Mayor Baraka said, you're thinking about whether or not you're doing enough in a more comprehensive way, right? Certainly, you want to make certain that your law enforcement, arm is well supported. But really, the challenge starts long before it gets to them, right? What are the interventions that we have for young people? When we've had certain challenges in Jackson and we've seen schools close because our water system has collapsed, and we learned that for a good portion, if not the majority of our students in our public school system, the only meal that they can depend on is the meal that they get while they're in school, for many of them. And at the same time, we're having conversations about why the sharpest increase in violence is amongst our youngest demographic, right? Are we seeing them on the fringes of our society and not feeling supported, not feeling loved, and at the same time just simply criticizing them for the trauma that they've experienced and how they respond to it. And so as mayor, you're looking at, not only how you have a good police chief, right, and the support that the police department needs, but more importantly, whether you're truly wrapping your arms around the community in every way. The people who paint the picture of violence in your community are the people that you have to love on the most.
How about you, Mayor? What keeps you up at night?
Well, I often say that at the end of the day, I'm out like a light. But I will tell you that I end my day thinking about how much of a difference have I made this day in the lives of the 450,000 people that we serve in our community. I think about, am I going to get a call tonight? And I pray that I don't, because every time there's a homicide in our city, I get a phone call. It doesn't matter what time it is. It could be 2 o'clock in the morning. And so when I sleep through the night and I don't get that call, it's a good night. When I go through the day and I don't get that call, it's a good day. But I also recognize that the work doesn't end, that we have to continue to intensify our efforts around what many have described now as an epidemic that exists within our community. And I know that we have work to do, but I am pleased to date with the outcomes that we're seeing in terms of the practical application that we've made to various principles that's making a difference.
Mayor Jones?
Just like Mayor Western Broom, I'm out like a light at the end of the day as well. I run after a 15-year-old at home. But I think the thing that startles me most in the morning is that first email praying, no homicides, no homicides, no homicides, that I get from the police department. And then just like all of my fellow brother and sister mayors up here have said, I just try to make sure that I do the best and show up the best way that I can for my community every day. And I think the other thing that keeps me up is the proliferation of guns in our community. Missouri is an open carry state, which means that just about anybody can carry a gun openly. We have no red flag laws, no background checks, no nothing. And so when I get calls from people saying, I saw this man walking down the street with an AK-47, it's totally legal for them to do that. So not being able to have any tools to take guns off our streets is actually what really keeps me up some nights.
And Mayor Western Broom, I'll go to you on that because you've had some success with gun buyback programs, right? Mayor Lumumba, I want to get to you because it seems like your state works against you. You know, you guys can't even have that. But what has been effective for you as far as being able to get some of those guns off the street?
Well, certainly, I would say that gun buyback programs are part of the equation. One, we do have people that come out last year. We had nearly, I think, 100 people that came to one of the events. But what it does, it elevates awareness for many people who don't realize that they can turn these guns in. And not only is that one less gun on the street, but they also get gift cards for turning them in. But I would say, Lindsay, it's an equation that we work with. That is part of the equation. Community engagement is another part of the equation, which we have seen very effective in terms of violence interrupters and resident leaders in our community. Focusing on mental health is part of that equation, as well as our law enforcement. So we've built this equation, what I would say, that has worked for us in that now in the first quarter of this year, we've seen a 35% reduction in homicides.
Mm-hmm. Mayor Lumumba, I want to get to you because there's so much really to unpack in Mississippi with what's going on. One, maybe you can give us an update on what's happening with the Republican lawmakers who are really trying to take over local control with regard to your water, your judiciary systems, and then also with regard to the guns and what you run into when you are a reform-minded mayor and you have the state seemingly working against you to make any kind of advances forward.
Yeah, well, I'll take the latter part of your question first. You know, what I witnessed in Jackson is much like Mayor Jones spoke to, where we have residents who call in absolute, fear about people walking down the street with, semi-automatic weapons. And it is absolutely legal. When people look at or try to make the correlation of what exactly, does open carry do, right? Not only does it, allow people to brandish weapons and put one another in fear and eliminates any opportunity to de-escalate conflict that's taking place, it also limits law enforcement. Because when you have open carry, there is no ability to distinguish lawful ownership or the lack thereof of a firearm, right? As I've spoken out about this issue, I've had people to critique me and say, well, cars kill people, right? I said, well, yeah, except for the fact that you have to take a driving test, right? You have to have all kinds of registration. You have to get it registered each and every year, the vehicle, and all of these things that we have because we understand, just how dangerous, a vehicle can be if not properly operated. Yet we don't have the basic level of control over firearms. And so, I think that's a good way to get to the other portion of your question, because a lot of the preemption, a lot of the struggle that we saw with the state came on the heels of my decision to ban open carry at the start of the pandemic. I was looking at a portion of the law that said that you had this restrictive means within the confines of an emergency, and it was after I tried to protect my community that the state saw fit to declare war against the city of Jackson. And so whether we're talking about issues with our infrastructure, whether we're talking about public safety, these things that amount to cycles of humiliation on our community, what we have seen as we have cried out for resources, cried out for diplomatic discussions to find solutions, is either a willful neglect or a deliberate indifference towards our issues. And instead, what they have now chosen to do is to attack Black leadership, attack this Black city. What they feel that they cannot acquire through a electoral process, they have decided that they will legislate their way into controlling. 1020 is a bill that was offered this legislative session to expand what they call the Capitol Complex Police. The Capitol Complex District was created in 2016, before I ran the first time. I opposed it at that time. Some of my contemporaries actually supported it because it was packaged as an infrastructure bill, right? But we always saw it as a Trojan horse, actually intended to take control over certain portions of the city. So 1020 proposes to expand this Capitol Police footprint into the most densely populated, white populated parts of the city, right? So it's segregationist as well, right? It's equal protection issues around it. And so, it would give the power of this Capitol Complex Police, which is controlled by the state, does not have direct accountability to the residents, to oversee this area and spread through different portions of the city. And I want to be clear, this is a police force that has already, within a limited frame of operations, less than a year, they've already seen more officer-involved incidents than not only JPD, but about 5 or 6 surrounding cities to Jackson over the last 2 to 3 years, right? Just within a window of about 8 or 9 months. They shot a young brother through the windshield of his car, unarmed young man who was driving with his girlfriend, and we have yet to hear the results of that investigation. They are consistently performing police chases throughout our city, shooting at vehicles while they're chasing them, so much so that a woman sleeping in her bedroom in her home had a bullet enter into her house and strike her in the arm. And fortunately, she did not lose her life. And there are becoming too many instances to recount. So the first concern about 1020 is the expansion of the power of this police department. And then the second issue is that in addition to the expansion of the power and jurisdiction of this police department, they want to create a separate judicial system where they would be able to appoint circuit court judges to oversee the cases of the people who are arrested by these departments. Appointed, not elected. Appointed, not elected. And so there is no direct accountability to the people that they serve. They would be appointed.
And tell us about the racial dynamic there as well.
So well, first and foremost, you know, the appointments are to be provided by the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who's white. The prosecutors that are supposed to serve in this court are to be appointed by the Attorney General, who's white. And they also would have power not to actually detain people in Hinds County where Jackson is, but take them to the state fairgrounds, you know, round them up. And if you know anything about Mississippi's history and the civil rights movement and how black people were rounded up and taken to the state fairgrounds, then it certainly speaks to that. And so it is an attack in every sense. It not only comes, and it's packaged as a public safety measure. Mind you, I told you that they were creating a district in the most densely white populated part of the city, the most affluent parts of the city, but also having one of the lowest crime rates. So if it was simply about the issues of violence or crime and protection, then you wouldn't carve out the lowest, the area with the lowest rate of violence in the city. And also giving judges the power to overhear civil cases. So it's about how do we seize control and eliminate black power.
There's so much more that I want to get back to with that, but I want to bring the other mayors in because I'm curious to see if you experience that in perhaps a different way where the state really gets in the way of local action.
Yes, absolutely. A lot of times Missouri looks at what happens in Mississippi and says, hold my beer. Or vice versa, right? And in St. Louis, we have the only remaining police department that is controlled by the state. St. Louis was controlled by, our police department was controlled by the state up until 10 years ago, and it's been like this since right before the Civil War. And as we speak, the Missouri legislature is debating a bill to try to take over our police department after we've had local control of our police department for the last 10 years in the name of public safety. But it's not about public safety, it's about power and control, because the two largest cities in the state of Missouri have black mayors, myself and Mayor Quentin Lucas. And he is fighting the state also to try to regain control of his police department because it appoints this 5-member board that the governor appoints, and it is confirmed by the Senate. And so the police chief has to report to 5 bosses, of which the mayor is on this board, and the mayor constantly gets outvoted. Now, the state control of our police department was a hot mess back in the 1800s. It was a hot mess when we had it, and it's a hot mess in Kansas City. They've had the 3 most violent years on record in Kansas City under state control. And it makes the police board accountable to this 5-member board. So they have called in previous years, they called in favors for their friends or family to get them out of jail. If you were a police officer and wanted a promotion or even to be employed by the St. Louis Police Department, you had to have an ace on the inside that knew one of these board members. It was a political hot mess, and now they want to take us back to that. They don't want public safety, because if they did, then they wouldn't have the lax gun laws that we do. They would pass universal background checks or red flag laws, or stop preemption of the cities from passing our own common sense gun safety laws. And and where I said that Missouri said, hold my beer, they passed a law called the Second Amendment Preservation Act that if any law enforcement official took someone's gun away and that person felt that it was a violation of their Second Amendment rights, then they can then sue that officer for $50,000 an occurrence. And so we recently won our first round of challenging that law. Federal court sided with us that it was a violation of the supremacy clause of the U.S. Constitution, but we know that the Attorney General is going to appeal, and this could very well make its way all the way up to the Supreme Court. We see this every day, as we are trying to implement common sense solutions on the local level. We can't get guns off our streets, so we have to invest in the people and in community, invest in community violence intervention programs, investing in more mental health services, in alternative response methods. And so those things are slowly working. But as we visited Newark, New Jersey a few months ago, we know that we have to give these things time to work because we didn't get to this place overnight, and we won't get out of it overnight.
What are some common sense policies that you feel that you could get some help from the state or federal government level that would immediately impact and be of benefit to your communities?
Universal background checks and red flag laws, I think, would help tremendously, and going back to the ban on assault weapons.
Mayor Barack, I want to bring you in here because as we heard that the violent crimes are down in St. Louis, in Baton Rouge, we know that in Newark, so you became mayor in 2014, you guys had the highest number of violent crimes in 2015, but every year it's gone down, and now we have the numbers at about half of what they were in 2015. Yes, yes. What's the secret sauce there?
Well, I don't know if it's a secret, and it's, it really is about collaboration and building the kind of ecosystem of violence prevention and police intervention collectively. And, usually we are talking about these things in separate places because there's a bad relationship between community and police. And bad is an understatement, right? So we had to work on that. Interesting enough, when I came into office, we were just finishing up, the federal government was finishing up the investigation, the Department of Justice around our police department, so we came under a consent decree. We welcomed it, actually, and I think that has helped our police department at least begin to change patterns and practices in their relationship with the police, with the community, begin to understand that needed to change. And that's important because it helped us help the police department have a different lens when looking at the community and be more open-minded around the programs that we were providing or suggesting that they should have. I brought a good friend of mine from California, Akila Sherrills, into city of Newark, who I've known for 20 years. When they had the peace treaty and all the kind of thing that was going on in LA, he came to Newark and stood up the Newark Community Street Team for me in the city. And from there, we began to build out an ecosystem. We created an Office of Violence Prevention, Brick City Peace Collective, as an umbrella organization to bring in all of the community-based organizations and intervention groups that have been doing this work for decades without resource, without information, without real data, without talking to each other. And we began giving them those things. We put out RFPs to give them money. Right now, we have an RFP on the street for about $16 million to spread to community-based organizations to continue to do the work in our city in relationship with the police department. So not just separate, right? So they share data, right? And the only time they share individuals is when police officers say, here, there's 50 guys that we've been, or folks that we've been dealing with. We want to give them to you. We call it a soft handoff to you guys to see if you could do something with this group, whether we have intervention programs through workforce development, summer youth academy, opportunities for training, all of those things we do. And we put social workers in every police station, in the youth detention center, in the general jail where people go when they get arrested, and the social workers graduate the same time the police graduate from the academy. So they get on the stage with police officers. We give them a ceremony the same time because they're a part of the public safety ecosystem. It's not separate. So we never fell into the argument or let the conservatives beat us down with, oh, you're taking money from the police. We actually flipped that on its head and said we're actually adding resources to public safety by adding social workers, by adding violence intervention specialists, by adding all of these folks to that ecosystem. And it's true, it helps us reduce violence and crime. But obviously, at the base of that was the Newark Community Street Team. When we first brought NCST on, they began to set a solid foundation in the city, began to talk to the funders and everybody else to make them understand that this was the strategy that we were using, and we showed some very early dividends. And from that, I just built on it and built on it and built on it. And we still have a lot of work to do because this is an ecosystem. It's not just one organization or the police department doing specific things. And what has helped our police actually police better. So now they do intelligence-based police and not this broken windows that led to broken practices, that led to people getting broken necks, right? So at the end of the day, they don't do that anymore. They do intelligence-based policing, focused deterrence. They work with the data with the street team. We target areas and target the worst offenders in our community. So we actually have less arrests in the city, and we still witness a reduction in violence and crime as we arrest less people, which proves that there's no causal relationship between arresting people and reduction of violence and crime at the same time.
How important are the alternative response units to incorporate and have that as an option? You know, clearly we do have a mental health crisis in our country. And how important is it for you as mayors that when someone is in the midst of a mental health crisis, that perhaps it's not the police who come locked and loaded to answer that call?
If I may, you know, when we think, and I celebrate my brother's success, you know, we say when we gather that good mayors borrow ideas, great mayors steal them. And so we're building a Office of Violence Prevention and Trauma Recovery, much like our brother Rise has done. I'll give him credit the first 2 times. By the 3rd time, I feel that I've said it more than him, and so it'll be mine. But, you know, we act as a carpenter with one tool, a hammer, and everything looks like a nail, right? And so we keep responding in the same way. We live in a nation that has more law enforcement than any other nation in the world. We have more people incarcerated than any other nation in the world. Yet and still we see high levels of violence that is at the highest, you know, of all nations. And so if there was a correlation between over-incarceration and over-policing and public safety, right, then we would live in the safest place on the planet, right? While we're talking about the violence that we experience in Jackson, Mississippi has the highest incarceration rate in the nation, right? And so that means that we're the definition of insanity. We're doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting a different result. And so we have to evaluate what our ultimate goals are. Let me share this personal story. So I am the youngest of 3. My oldest brother was shot in the head when I was in the 3rd grade. He's paralyzed on the left side of his body. So I understand the anger that families feel after experiencing a violent event. And I understand the desire for justice, right? But the question we have to ask ourselves when we look at our punitive system, exclusively punitive system, is our goal in order to be punitive, or is our goal to stop the harm, right? And I suggest that our ultimate goal should be to stop the harm. That does not mean that when someone, you know, as Mayor Baraka said, you know, commits the most heinous crime, that there isn't a appropriate, you know, response to that, right? But how are we stopping this from happening? I'll end with this. One of the biggest arrests that we made last year in the city of Jackson was a young man by the name of Joseph Brown. Joseph Brown was 17 years old. He was responsible for about 10 murders in the city of Jackson, right? His crew that he hung with was anyone ranging from the age of 14 to 18 years old. And the way that the police department was able to ultimately make this arrest after they had been searching for them for some time is based on what they put on social media, right? And two things struck me watching the videos of this dialogue between these young people. One, the depravity of heart that they were displaying, right? You know, just laughing and joking about the things that they had done. But the other thing was that I just could not, that I could not forget, is that they sounded like 15, 16, and 17-year-olds, right? And so in that instance, you know, there is very little rehabilitation available to them after what they had displayed. But what it does mean is that there's another group of young people that have yet to commit the crimes that Joseph Brown and his friends committed. And we have to intercept them before they become the next Joseph Brown gang. All right.
That's good.
I absolutely agree with my colleague, and I wanted to say that when we looked at alternatives, one of the things that we did, very similar themes that you will hear, is that we, at the same time when we brought our largest infrastructure tax to the people, we also did a mental health tax for a facility that would keep our people out of jail when we knew that many of them had mental health issues, and take them to a facility that we now call the Bridge Center, which offers behavioral health assessment, gets them to where they need to be. You know, Mayor Lumumba talked about our young people. We are now partnering with schools in our community to elevate what we call our school outreach dream academies, SODA, because we don't want to lose another generation to gun violence. We are also implementing and relaunching this summer our Summer of Hope program, because what we have found, and I think it is a common denominator, our people are losing hope. You know, this continuous violence, I think, is directly connected to hopelessness in many ways. So we've called it our Summer of Hope. And while our young people are out of school for 8 weeks, we intensify our efforts in neighborhoods where we have seen violent crime take place. And what we do is we offer opportunities for those young people to engage in conversations and activities. We bring their parents to the table. We have concerts. It's almost like your old-fashioned block party, but it's with an intentional approach to capturing conversations and what concerns those individuals in the community as well. And we found that that was key, the Summer of Hope, to our reduction last year of 22% in violent crime, because we intensified our efforts during the time when our young people were out of school. So these are just some of the alternative methods I have found, and I think we all have. You've got to be innovative and creative. You know, you have to put the community back in public safety. And that is what has made our efforts transformative. And I certainly would be remiss, just like Chokwe said, if I didn't give a shout out to Mayor Baraka. Because when I first came in office, people were talking about what he was doing in Newark in terms of crime, his approach to crime, public safety. I called him, my team went up there, and we have been replicating much of what he did in Newark, and that's why we're seeing a lot of the results that we're seeing in Baton Rouge.
Can I say something about Trump? I just wanted to say, like, we just have to be careful when we start talking about mental health, because you know there are a lot of folks that are in these institutions who, when we say mental health, they have one idea of what you're talking about, and they think we need social workers to respond to. In Newark, they call them 525. That's the code, mental health. Somebody had a break. So when there's stress put on something, and there's too much stress, and they can't handle it, it breaks. There's so much stress in our community, right? So we're suffering not from post-traumatic stress syndrome, because post mean is over, right? This is continuous stress and trauma that happens in our community all of the time. On top of all of the stuff that we have to already deal with, poverty and poor schools and bad housing and, just the precariousness of living in these situations, right? And then all of the violence that's heaped on communities and families on top of that. So what you see happening in these communities is not by happenstance. This is by design. It's deliberate kind of things that are going on in these neighborhoods that we have to intervene in. And so you need a huge infrastructure to do that. Right now, everybody's operating in silos: the probation department, the juvenile justice, the school system, the police department, and community violence organizations. And sometimes we start fighting each other. If you don't have something coordinated together to address what's happening, then you'll see all of this disruption and chaos that takes place in our community. So we don't want social workers just to respond to, we got a 525 incident on South 17th Street. We need them to respond comprehensively and systemically to all issues that are taking place in our community, not just the specific, this one police shouldn't respond to. The police need to be working with the social workers every day, all the time, and juvenile justice and parole and everybody, to make sure we have a coordinated response.
And Mayor Jones, I know you wanted to.
Yeah, these things are muscles that are built over time. And we just opened our first Office of Violence Prevention last year. I put it in our budget. Budgets are moral documents, and they show what your mayor cares about. So go back to your cities and see what your mayor cares about. So we started our Office of Violence Prevention. We put a lot of money, a lot of our ARPA funds towards seeding these community violence intervention programs, which are all under our OPV. We have a cops and clinicians program where a social worker or other behavioral health professional rides with officers, but that social worker is dressed in what we call we call them the purple shirts because they wear purple shirts. But now that muscle is there, our officers know that when they encounter these situations that they're not trained to respond to, they will call them for backup and have them intervene if it's a nonviolent situation. And then we also have a 911 diversion program where if you're calling 911 and they can tell that it's a mental health crisis or a crisis that doesn't require an officer response, you'll get connected to a behavioral health professional on the phone, and then they can talk you down or talk with you through that situation, and they follow up. Because that's the key part of all of this alternative response is not only the initial response, but the follow-up. And a lot of times cities don't have those resources, but we do have community partners that we use to make sure that the follow-up happens and that it keeps people out of the system from entering the justice system. And we've saved millions of dollars and thousands of man-hours just by these two programs that are now deploying the right resource to the right call.
I've been a part of a prison ministry for several years, and I hear the same story again and again, which is one, that the people who are in there are going back. They get out and then they end up back in there again. And they also suggest that it's too difficult to re-enter society once you've been arrested. And I'm curious what kinds of programs you all are implementing or thinking about in order to make that a little less difficult.
Yeah, we work with, again, our community partners to make sure that we start that process before that person gets out of prison. So that they are connected with a social worker or other professional to try to figure out where they're going to go, how they're going to get employed. We ban the box as well, and we give second chances to people who've been justice involved, and it's personal for me because my father was justice involved as well. So if I can't do it, for my dad, then, what am I here for? So we try to make sure that we do as much work prior to them getting out so they have a safe and soft place to land to try to decrease the opportunity for them to recidivize and go back.
We're looking at the same in terms of our workforce development, whether it's our efforts to lay dark fiber and needing a workforce that can support that and coding. When we when we look at, you know, the rates in which people return, and we look at the challenges that we have within our communities, I called it earlier a cycle of humiliation, where you have high violence, poor performing schools, failing infrastructure. And so what we're trying to focus our economy as a city on is looking at the inherent dignity of every person and creating what we call a dignity economy. And if we are in fact trying to create a new economy, then we have to do it with the surplus of people who have been cast aside by our old economy. And so those individuals are those that are formerly incarcerated, those that we have not looked for new opportunities and built a plan for their success. And so that has to be as fundamental to our success as what we're funding and what our objectives are.
In Louisiana in 2021, we passed the Fair Chance Law for people coming out of incarceration. And now on a local level, we're expanding that with city-parish contracts to say that people who are doing contracts for the city have to apply the same principles as the state does, so that we can expand our network of giving people opportunities who are coming out of prison.
If I could add one other thing. Also, as a part of our efforts in violence reduction, we need to hire credible messengers, right? You know, people who understand the cycles that many of our residents, young people, find themselves in. And so we can pay them, you know, people who admit that they used to be a part of the problem, pay them to be a part of the solution.
So we actually have a built-in reentry program in the city government where we take from 50 to 100 folks who just came home, and we put them in DPW. They're associated with the Reentry Corporation of America. We give them opportunities to get their driver's license back, to do all of the things that make it difficult for them to get a job, help them find housing, all these other kind of things that we work on collectively. You know, some of it is successful, some of it isn't. You know, you're talking about not just the laws that have been changed. So New Jersey has kind of unique laws that allow, you know, folks to make it easier for them to find their way back. But folks still privately refuse to rent homes to people who are incarcerated. Though it's illegal not to do that in New Jersey, it's still difficult to get a job, whether you have your driver's license or not. And so if you've been gone for a long period of time, you don't have the skills or the training or the certifications that you need. So we have to do all of these things to bring people back into society. I know people thought being the mayor was just paving the roads and picking up the snow and collecting the garbage. But in our cities, we got to figure out a whole bunch of other things that suburban mayors don't have to worry about.
And lastly, I'm curious because you mentioned it, Mayor LaBamba, as far as the focus on young people. And I am wondering what we can do to make sure our youth don't end up being on the wrong side of the law, right? And so are there some policies, some programs that you all already have in place in your cities targeting the youth?
Yeah, we have year-round youth jobs because, you know, sometimes they have summer youth jobs, but I know that our kids sometimes need it year-round. They're helping support their families. You know, younger and younger children are raising younger siblings. So we have year-round plus summer youth jobs. We have a youth build program that targets kids who didn't graduate from high school and gives them a trade. Then they can join a union and you know, get into the carpentry field or any of the union trades. And then we also our Office of Violence Prevention coordinates all of our youth programming, so it works with our schools to make sure that we're connecting our children to youth to resources. And the last one we're doing is new companies that come into the city that want tax breaks on, you know, on building or developing in the city. We do MOUs and community benefit agreements that gives our graduates from our public schools a right of first refusal at those jobs. So they can have a pipeline directly from children graduating from high school into those low-skilled jobs.
We have a similar program. We have our Mayor's Youth Workforce Experience, which takes place during the summer, but we also expand that with our Employ BR program, which is focused on young people from 16 actually through age 24. And these are people who often don't finish high school, and they are connected to workforce opportunities with our Employ BR program.
And Mayor Westenberg, I know that you had mentioned that you've called before, you know, especially like over to Newark to say, hey, what are you guys doing over here? Obviously, it's been said iron sharpens iron. How often, I'm just personally curious about this, how often do you all pick up the phone and say, hey, we have this problem here, I'm curious what you all are doing over there, or just to share a success?
I think I just called Sharon a couple days ago. So.
Frequently.
Yeah. We speak to each other very frequently, not only as an opportunity to exchange ideas, but it's a bit therapeutic as well. There's some level of you know, just having a shoulder to lean on, and so it's very. I'm blessed to be not only in this position, but to be in this position at a time where there are so many transformative leaders in the space at the same time.
Well, we are certainly blessed. I think I can speak for all of us here to have your leadership and know that you all are at the wheel and directing the course of our collective future. And so we thank you so much for your time. I could continue asking you a lot of questions. We only got through really about half of it, but with the limited time, we thank you so much for the conversation. Really appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, before they leave, please give them another big round of applause to Lindsay Davis of ABC News. And I want to say one thing before they leave. You witnessed excellence in leadership. You witnessed innovation and determination. You witnessed talent and seriousness. You witnessed mayors who are not watching, not simply wondering, but mayors who've taken the bull by the horns and are doing what this summit is about, balancing safety with justice. In a difficult time, in a challenging environment, where not everyone in their communities and states are on their side. So I am proud because, you know, not only did I serve as mayor, I'm a second-generation mayor. I knew the great legends like Maynard Jackson and Tom Bradley and Coleman Young and my father and the generation I served with, and I'm proud of them. Every one of them is talented enough to be doing many other things with their lives. Being mayor can be thankless, it can be challenging, it can be difficult. They don't have private planes. They don't have Secret Service contingents of 15 people. They don't have 500 people on their staff writing everything they say. They're on the front lines. They're in the trenches. They're in the communities. They are in the kitchen. Give them a round of applause. Mayor Baraka, Mayor Lumumba, Mayor Broome, and Mayor Jones. A big round of applause for these mayors. And another round of applause for Lindsay Davis for doing an excellent job for her work. One more time. And it is now my pleasure, to introduce someone who in this city needs no introduction, but simply needs a presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to present to you the mayor of the city of New York, Mayor Eric Adams.
Thank you. Good morning, and to my fellow mayors and all who are engaging in this important conversation that the National Urban League is holding. I want to say welcome to the city. And if you are from outside the city, we have only one ask, and that is to spend money as much as possible. You know, and to Mark, who is the mayor's mayor, oftentimes I reach out to him for consultation and advice because he clearly has his finger on the pulse of how we must face these real challenging issues in our city. And the conversation around public protection and police and communities' involvement is really one of the paramount issues that we're facing. Here's my question that I want to leave with you, and I'm not really looking for an answer, and I just want us to just reflect on it. It is something that Chancellor Banks always talk about. It is the Maasai tribe in Africa. When they greet each other, they ask the question, how are the children? And based on that answer, we're able to determine the success of the tribe, the village, the city, the nation. And so my question to you is, how are the children? We are witnessing one of the highest levels of depression and suicidal thoughts. We're watching TikTok and social media have our young people violently attack each other and teaching them how to steal cars. The same TikTok that you can't play in China where it was created. You know, how are the children? They start their day, they take a route to the local candy store, bodega, and pick up cannabis laced with fentanyl and sit in the classroom and try to comprehend the difficult challenges in front of them. They're watching bullets carve highways of death where 9mm bullets are ripping apart the anatomy of our city. Young people are killing young people from guns that they did not manufacture, but they find their ways into the streets of our cities, from Chicago to New York to Atlanta to Los Angeles and so many other places. So the real question is, how are the children? And if our children are not fine, we cannot point the fingers at our children. We need to point the fingers at ourselves. And as we look at this real challenge that we're facing right here in New York City, and my heart breaks when we lost young Jordan. Many people miss the fact that Jordan is my son's name. And I think about every time I lose a young man or woman throughout this entire country that are falling victim to so many levels. We cannot be so encompassed and so thoughtful on talking about merely how this young man died without answering the question, how was he living? We need to be open about that. One brother stopped me on the street. He said he was a part of one of the major fraternal organizations in the city, and he wanted to know what was I going to do about this. I stated to him, brother, I've been in the subway system talking to young black men who are the majority of those who are homeless and dealing with severe mental illnesses. And I stated I have been in the subway system for almost 2 years now, talking to them, trying to get them off the system in the care that they deserve. I don't want us to be energized when we have a death and not energized when there's conditions that's creating the deaths that are at our hand. We have to be proactive and not merely reactive. And that is how we can turn the question mark of how are the children to an exclamation point of saying our children are fine. We have a country with a downstream mindset. Archbishop Desmond Tutu stated, we spend a lifetime pulling people out of the river. No one goes upstream and prevent them from falling in the first place. By the time a police officer encounters a young person, by the time a young person has a gun in his hand, by the time a young person is experiencing some of the crisis they are feeling, we're pulling them out of the river downstream. It's time to go upstream. Upstream is doing dyslexia screening in every school so we don't have 40% of our children being dyslexic on Rikers Island. 80% don't have a high school diploma or equivalency diploma. 55% have mental health issues and 18% have severe mental health issues. If we take the conversation upstream, we won't be downstream pulling them out of the river, and people are making money off of pulling our children out of the river. Let's go upstream and invest in our children so we don't have to do this. That's the conversation we must have. That is what we're doing in the city, and that's what mayors are doing all over this country. What they're doing in Atlanta, Chicago, Detroit, all over this country, you see mayors stepping up to the plate and getting it right. And the national government can't destabilize our cities by giving us crises they're not willing to pay for. The asylum seeker issue that are hidden, the 4 top cities in this country, Chicago, Houston, New York, and potentially Los Angeles, is going to undermine our economy and the resources we should be putting into raising our children and families are going to be changed and altered forever, and generations will be impacted. So I hope that we have engaging conversations. The goal is to have real talk on how we resolve these issues that we are facing and take our solutions upstream. I don't want another generation being pulled out of the river. It's time for us to prevent them from falling in the first place. And we could all say then, when we're asked, how are the children? We could say the children are fine. Thank you.
Before everyone departs, before you depart, let's give Mayor Adams another big round of applause. Thank him for being here. Let me thank you, and I'm going to bring Carol Mason up to tell you about what we have in store for the remainder of the summit. Ladies and gentlemen, President Carol Mason.
All right, the learning's not over, the fun's not over. We have a wonderful series of panels, but first I want to thank our mayor for joining us today. Let's give him another big round of applause. And our wonderful mayor's panel and Vanita Gupta, our Associate Attorney General. So, it's not over. The afternoon, we've got, right up now in the moot court, we've got advancing gun violence reduction efforts with a panel discussion moderated by Jonathan Capehart of the Washington Post and MSNBC. We've got a panel on no justice without gender justice in L61, moderated by B. Hansen, who used to run the Office of Violence Against Women. And the third panel is From the War on Drugs to Harm Reduction, Recent Transformations in Drug Policy in the Dining Room, moderated by Jasmine Tyler. And the fourth panel is Addressing Racial Disparities in the Criminal Legal System, and that will be moderated by Ed Chung, and it's a phenomenal panel with Kahil Muhammad, Jamila Haj, Arva Rice. So please join these panels. The fun is not over, the learning is not over, the engagement is not over. I will see you in the breakout sessions, but thank you all for joining this wonderful event led by the National Urban League and John Jay. Thank you.